Hello, everyone. Welcome to one of the podcast series. Today, we are in conversation with Dr. O.P. Agarwal. We are very excited to welcome you, sir. I would like to introduce you to our viewers and listeners. O.P. Agarwal, currently the CEO of the World Resources Institute, is an expert in urban transport, climate change, and transport economics. He has been a visiting professor at the National Rail and Transportation Institute and taught subjects like urban planning models, transportation finance and economics, and law technology and public policy. Let me warn you before this introduction may seem long, but we need to celebrate the marvelous work he has done all these years. He is someone who doesn't need an about section on LinkedIn because his work and experience says it all. After completing his electrical and electronics engineering from IIT Madras, he went on to become an IAS officer and served the country for more than 28 years. He has also gained a master's degree in technology policy and transportation from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and holds a PhD in transport economics from IIT Delhi. During his IAS tenure, he has worked extensively in various departments of Assam and also in different central government ministries in Delhi. Among the long list of wonderful contributions he has made is authoring the National Urban Transport Policy. He has been the executive director at the Indian School of Business and also chaired the US Transport Research Board's Committee on Transportation in Developing Countries. He has also worked as a senior urban transport specialist at the World Bank. He has worked in top government positions, been a part of top educational institutions across the country, and I would rather say the world, and also worked with leading global organizations. And when you talk to him, he is the most humble and exuberant person. All in all, he is a grandpa that we all want. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. We are extremely honored to be speaking with you.
Thanks, Janvi. Thanks for that very generous introduction. I don't think I deserve it all, but thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to talk to you.
That's a display of his humble nature right there. So, sir, starting the interview, what is your opinion over the establishment of a transportation institute in our country initiated by the Ministry of Railways?
I think it was a very visionary initiative. The reason I say this is there really hasn't been a comprehensive transportation educational program in the country till NRTI came in. You know, most IITs had some kind of a course on transportation, but that was mostly focused on civil engineering aspects of highway design and things like that. You do have schools of planning and architecture, which have courses on urban transport. But there again, it's much more about traffic management. It's, those kinds of things. But looking at a transportation program that brings together the multi-dimensionality of transport, its linkages to land use, its linkages to finance, its linkages to economics, its linkages to governance, linkages to human behavior, multiple things that really come into transportation. This kind of recognition was never there in India before. It's for the first time that an institute like this is bringing in all these multidimensionalities into transport. And if you look at what has happened so far, if you look at the Indian Railways, the people who join the Indian Railways at senior positions really come with very diverse academic backgrounds. There is no professional background in transportation that they have. They learn it on the job. They learn it with years of hard work on the job. But they are not required to have any professional transportation learning when they come into these jobs. If you look at various other road transport entities as well, it's more or less a similar situation. People come from various backgrounds. They learn on the job. But it's like you throw a person in a pond and that person to survive will learn how to swim. But a good swimming coach will teach you the right way to swim. And I think this is the role that NRTI will play in really getting professionalism into transport in the Indian transportation sector.
Right, sir. As you mentioned that this is first of its kind in India, and we know that you've pursued your postgraduate degree in transportation from MIT. So do you think there is a difference in the importance given to transportation education in different countries across the globe?
Absolutely. I think so far transportation education has not been a focus in India. It's been, I would say even abroad, transportation is much more at a master's level, not so much at an undergraduate level. It's much more at a master's level, at least from wherever I have come across this. In India, unfortunately, we do not have real transportation courses even at the master's level. And I think this is the gap that NRTI will fill in. Let's remember one thing, transportation at one point of time may have been a generalist field. It may have been something that you could learn adequately on the job. But I think in today's world, transport is very, very professional. It needs a much higher degree of professionalism than what it needed about 20 or 30 years ago. And that's the reason I say, setting up an institute like this, I think is a really visionary initiative. We will need it in the years to come in a very big way.
Right, sir. So I would like to ask that with respect to our growing population and changing times, like you said, a lot of professionalism is now needed. So where do you see our country in the coming years with respect to the transportation framework, let's say?
You see, let's look at why is transportation important. Let me pick it up from there and then link it to why it is important in the Indian context. What does transport do? Transport is not something that you need in itself. Often it's called a derived demand. That is, you need it because you need something else. You need to get to work. You need to get goods to move from where they are produced to where they are consumed. That's the kind of a demand that transportation serves. And if you look at economic development today, economic development is to a large measure dependent on how quickly goods can move from where they are produced to where they are consumed. It is highly dependent on how efficiently people are able to move around, get to their places of work, get to places where they need to sort of supply things. So transportation is a very important component of the whole economic growth. I would say not just economic growth, but even in terms of social well-being. Transportation serves a very important purpose. Children go to school. Many more children are getting into the educational field. Children are studying for much longer than they used to earlier. Today, we need healthcare facilities. You have a fairly, a population that is growing in age and size, and medical care is becoming very important. So all these needs, transportation is, I often call it like the circulatory system in the human body. So if blood flows smoothly, a person is alive. If blood flow stops, the person is dead. Similarly, in a city, if the transportation system is functioning well, it means the country is alive, economic activities are thriving, people are doing well. If transportation stops, everything comes to a standstill. I think it's fundamental. Transport is fundamental.
I agree, sir. And as you talk about the economic standpoint, because of the sudden hit of the pandemic, there has been a lot of impact on many industries from both economic and developmental standpoint. So can you throw some light on what is happening in the transportation sector?
See, Janvi, that's a very interesting question. And frankly, I can only make assumptions. It's something which we have yet to see what this will do. But certainly a number of things have happened. And the kind of things that have happened is people have suddenly realized that you really don't have to go to work every day. Right? You can work from home for quite some time. But we really need to carry out studies to find out how many of these people are really in the kind of jobs where you don't have to go to work every day. I'm fortunate, my job today, I could do, last year or so, I've been almost every day I've been working from home. I don't like it. I like to go and meet people. I like to go to the office, meet my colleagues, but I may not do that every day. So what will happen is a fairly sizable section of the population, which is working in many of these white-collar jobs, they might reduce the number of days on which they travel. That's one change that I think will happen. As far as goods movements are concerned, I don't think that will change. In fact, there you may see an increase. See, very often what I used to go and do was going to a shop and buying things. Today you order online. So urban freight patterns may change. You may have much more of online delivery, but how those delivery systems are organized to be more efficient, only time will tell. I think the demand for motor vehicles or personal motor vehicles will come down. And if demand for personal motor vehicles comes down, it means that the demand for parking spaces will come down, which means you may see more green areas in cities. All these are good things to happen. But I think it's a little early. How things will rebound, you don't know. There have been, situations like this many years ago. So there have been the plague, there have been, something called the Black Death, which happened in Europe over a period of 2 to 3 years. Large number of people were killed. But at that point of time, when this thing went away, transportation came back to what it was before that event took place. But sometimes I argue that they did not have the kind of developments in IT that you have now. So will the development of platforms like this one that we are talking on really help reduce travel demand in a big way? We don't know. I think this is something that only time will tell.
Right. I think this is something that we will eventually figure out as we go forward.
Correct.
And speaking about the pandemic, in the past, we have seen that reports have shown in 2019 that about 20 to 30% of emergency cases patients lose their lives due to traffic congestion. And because of the pandemic, it is directly connected to the medical field, and there have been a lot of issues coming up. And of course, transportation is related when it comes to ambulances and transportation of the medical supplies. So how do you think that we can tackle these problems?
See, one is, as I said, I think the pandemic will lead to a certain level of reduction in travel demand in urban areas. My expectation is the levels of congestion that we have had will see some decline. That's my presumption, or maybe wishful thinking. I don't know, whichever way you want to take it. But I think that's something that may happen. But the lesson that we should also learn from this is that the way in which we have been trying to deal with the problems of congestion so far, are they the right ways? Is there something that we can do differently to deal with these problems? My feeling is that the efforts that we have made so far, they've been good efforts, but they've really not led to the kind of results that we were hoping to see. Is there something different that needs to come about? Do we really need so many vehicles on the roads? We are investing so much in public transport, but is the kind of shift to public transport happening the way we expected it to happen? I think this is where I talk about urban transport particularly is not just about civil engineering. It's not just about building a facility. It's also about looking at human behavior. There are psychological dimensions, there are sociological dimensions which determines how a person would like to travel. Just because you have a facility, the person will use that facility. I think that's a very simplistic assumption that is often made when investments are made in public transport systems. So these are things that we must start getting a little wiser towards and start doing things the way they will be attractive to people as a more sustainable way of traveling. I think that is the complexity that does not come simply by years of working in a certain field. This is the kind of complexity that an educational system will build into mindsets at an early stage. And I'm coming back to the question of how NRTI is a great idea.
Yes, so as you said, that just because a public transportation facility is there doesn't mean that people will be using it. So that really hits home for me. And I know that you believe that mass transit is a public good. So how do you think that the youth of today can understand this message when most of us are largely into private vehicles and cars?
See, I have a feeling that is changing. I have a feeling that is changing. It may be changing for very different reasons compared to what we may want to believe. But a lot of the younger generation today, people like you, for example, are not carried away by the need to have a car of your own and a fancy car of your own. My generation, when we were young, we wanted to have a car. And the example I like to give is of my daughter, who, when she started working, I kept telling her she used to take an auto rickshaw, she used to take an Uber. So why don't you buy a car? And she said, no, I don't need a car. So I thought maybe she couldn't afford it and didn't want to tell me. That's why she kept avoiding it. So I told her, look, I'll pay for it. Why don't you buy a car? And then she got upset, said, if you want to spend money on me, get me a good phone. I don't need a car. So I feel the younger generation today is not carried away by the social status of car ownership. For them, the social status of a good phone is more powerful than the social status of a car. And the problems with a car is driving through congestion, the kind of congestion we see today, finding a place to park somewhere. Those kinds of things are a big hassle. They don't like it. And why would you want that if you, within a few minutes, you can get someone to come, pick you up, drop you wherever you want to go, and you're a free bird to do what you like after that. So I think the convenience of a lot of these aggregators that has come in has transformed mobility in many ways. And to my mind, this is where the younger generation will really go. The world is looking at far more sophisticated forms of this aggregation through what is otherwise known as the MaaS, mobility as a service, as they call it. I mean, these are the kinds of things where multiple forms of transport come onto a single aggregator platform. It really obviates the need for anyone to own a vehicle. I think that day will see far less congestion on the roads. We'll see the cities more as, aesthetical places to be in than brick and steel.
That was a very interesting story, sir, about you and your daughter. And I think it gives something for all of us also to introspect, and for the ones who are feeling this way, some reaffirmation of a kind that, yes, we are moving towards a different way. And so you also talked about congestion and urban transportation. And the Indian transportation system has been complicated because of the country's population and many other factors. But minds like you have been working on resolving and finding solutions over the same. One of such policies is the National Urban Transportation Policy, where you have played a pivotal role and been an author. Has it played out as per your expectations?
You see, sometimes they say if the creator doesn't get down to doing it, it may not go to the extent to which he or she wanted it to go. But no, to the credit of the policy and credit of the people who were implementing that policy, the one big change that I have seen is at the point when this policy was formulated, the period just before that, we saw a lot of every month there was a photograph of the Chief Minister of Delhi inaugurating a new flyover. There was a lot of news about certain roads being widened. Whereas once the policy came in, and of course supported by the program at that time known as the JNNURM, the one big change it made was suddenly you see much more investment in public transport. So I think that is one shift that has happened, in the sense that the emphasis on public transport over road widening, I think that emphasis has happened. Before that, public transport was not such a big thing. It was much more about roads and road widening and flyovers that took the limelight. What probably has not happened or is yet to happen, or is happening slowly, I would say, is looking at cleaner vehicle technologies. So the National Urban Transport Policy does talk about cleaner vehicle and fuel technologies. That is today picking up with this whole push towards electric mobility. What has not happened at the same pace at which it should have was the emphasis on non-motorized transport. That means walking and cycling. But that is also now beginning to happen. So I think many of these things are happening, but perhaps not at the pace at which they could have happened. But things are happening in that direction. What has still yet to happen is a much closer integration of, a lot of these high-level investments with things like, other solutions. So let's say if you're building a metro, even while you build a metro, are you thinking of feeder systems? Are you thinking of transit-oriented development? Are you thinking of integrating different modes of transport? That kind of a holistic thinking about mobility in a city, that unfortunately has not been happening as of now. It's been more fragmented. Metros are being built on one side, buses are being bought on another side, roads are being widened on another side. That kind of comprehensive thinking, unfortunately, is yet to happen. But, to add on to it, I think it's part of the reason is because the ability to make that, comprehensive plan, that capability is missing. And that is missing because people have not gone through academic programs that help them think in that manner.
Right, so it is great to know that what the things that you've proposed, some of it has been implemented, some of it is being implemented, and some can possibly be implemented in the future. So we know that the smart cities idea, so like we know that good urban transportation is an important part of the smart cities individual goals and missions. And do you think ideas like prioritizing the movement of people and not vehicles, emphasis on adequate road space for sustainable transport modes such as walking and cycling, like you mentioned, non-motorized transport, do you think that those are being kept in mind? And if not, how can that be improved?
See, it is being kept in mind. See, the whole idea of moving people and not vehicles really came up at that time because bus rapid transit systems were coming to be known in India. The system in Delhi was sort of on the cards. Bus rapid transit was beginning to be known the world over. But the question that people used to ask is, should we have a lane separately only for buses? When you have maybe a bus going through it every 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but you have a lane only for buses, whereas the remaining lanes are very crowded. And that's where experts used to say that don't look at the number of vehicles, but look at the number of people who are traveling on that lane. So if you have 3 lanes on a certain road, let's have an equitable distribution of people on the 3 lanes and not vehicles. If you do that, you'll find that one lane, which is only for the bus, is carrying more people than the other lanes, which are for cars. That's why this whole concept of, prioritizing people over vehicles in allocation of road space really came from that. The same thing would apply if you look at cycle tracks or whether you look at walkways. It's the same logic that comes. A car that way is very inefficient when it comes to the use of road space. It occupies far too much space for the number of people who are in the car. That's how that whole logic came. And I think the whole emphasis on public transport and the more recent emphasis on cycling and walking is a manifestation of that principle.
Yes, sir. And as you say that, I remember how during our course, you showed us a visualization of, let's say 50 people, they are in their individual cars, and then they are in a bus, and they're all on their cycles. So like how much space is that occupying? That was really insightful. So I can understand what you're saying about the space being occupied by different modes of travel. Okay, sir. So the next thing is Delhi's air pollution problem is a very widely discussed problem in the country for the past few years. And one of the ways presented by you to tackle this problem was an ambitious shift to electric vehicles. And WRI is also actively working on electric mobility in India, from government policies and e-buses to the electronic vehicle industry revolution. So how do you envision the future of electric mobility in India, and how can transportation graduates help in achieving that?
You see, one of the problems with air pollution is that we have a lot of measurement and a lot of metrics that tell us what is the level of air pollution. But we don't have sufficient data on what are the sources of that pollution. What is causing that pollution? So it's one thing to know that we have a lot of pollution, but if you want to look at remedies, we need to know what is causing that pollution. And this is what scientists call source apportionment. So if this is the level of pollution, what are the sources that are contributing to this pollution? Unless we know that well enough, and we have data on trends of such pollution. Something may be causing pollution more during winter, something else in summer, something more in the morning, something else in the evening. So that kind of data has been one of the biggest weaknesses in tackling air pollution. But at least some studies that have been done, what they seem to indicate is that transport is a contributor, but it is not by far the biggest contributor. A lot of contribution is coming out of pollution through crop burning in neighboring areas. A lot of the pollution, particularly in winter, is due to the burning for heating purposes. So there are many different factors which are contributing. Dust, construction dust, road dust. These are major factors that are also contributing to pollution. In fact, transport is not the largest contributor. But what I have often argued is that transport, even if it's not the largest contributor, it is a base contributor. That means it is contributing a certain amount round the year. And if we can do something to reduce the contribution of transport to air pollution, you are reducing the base. That means you are creating more space on top. If there is sudden spurt in pollution for other reasons, you can sort of still deal with that because your base has come down. That has been my argument on focusing on transport, even if we don't fully know how much transport is contributing. And that's really the push towards electric mobility. I think Delhi government is moving very strongly on electric mobility. It's a little slow as far as electric mobility is concerned, because again, there are multiple departments that have never worked together, which have to now come together. The auto industry has worked with the oil industry. Over years, the auto industry and oil industry have come together. But today you have to look at the auto industry and the electricity industry having to come together. So, let's say it's a new marriage that will take a little time to stabilize. And once that happens, then things will run smoothly. This is the kind of difficulty we are facing today. It's also a kind of chicken and egg situation. People are not buying electric vehicles because they say, where are the charging stations? People are not setting up charging stations because they say, where is the electric vehicle to charge here? So these are teething problems that will always happen when you go towards a new technology. But I must say that the direction is right, and I'm confident it will pick up.
That's some very fascinating points that you mentioned, sir. And as you spoke about the lack of availability of data about the root cause problem, so I think that is something that the students of NRTI can take up and research, because I think the country is looking forward and looking at this institution as a form of a place where good research can happen. And even Piyush Goyal has given direction to the students for research areas. So I think this can be one of the other things that the students can take up.
Oh, there is a massive area for research, many different areas for research in the transport field in India. I think for research opportunities for students, the sky is the limit, because so far we have tended to use frameworks and models and other things which were developed in the West. We have been using them for deploying them in India. I often wonder whether they are really applicable the way they are applicable elsewhere. So do we need to develop our own models? Do we need to develop our own frameworks? There is a need for a lot of contextual research to happen in India. In the Indian context, what is the right thing? So I think there are huge opportunities for research. Yeah.
Right, sir. And now the next question is about something that you've been involved in big way and for the major part of your life, that is public policy and administration. So you've been involved in making public policies, and then in transportation space has also been rapidly evolving in the past decade, be it the National High-Speed Railway project or the metro projects in smart cities. So what are some insights you would like to give to aspiring transport enthusiasts and students about public policies in transportation?
The basic message I would give is public policy is very complex. It's not, that's why, I made this statement a little earlier also, that it's not about just civil engineering. It's not just about some form of engineering. Public policy is very, very complex. And public policies are multidimensional. They require an understanding of multiple academic disciplines. If you know engineering, but you don't do economics, you're not a good policy maker. You may know economics, but you don't know social sciences, other social sciences. You're not a good policy maker. So to that extent, policy making really involves an understanding of multiple academic disciplines. May not be getting into the kind of depth that a PhD in economics would want to get into, but he should understand the basics of economics, even if that person is an engineer or even if that person is a history student. It doesn't matter. So that is the complexity of public transport. And the other message in public policy is that there is no universal right answer. Every situation has its own right answer. And we have to identify what is the best option in our case. Just because the UK did something doesn't mean it's the best for us. If France did something in a certain manner, doesn't mean that it's the best option for us. So we have to have the wisdom to be able to understand what they did, see how they did it, understand their context, and then try to apply it in our context and make the changes that are necessary in our context. I think that is the important thing about public policy. That one, it is complex. Second, it's not something that you can borrow and copy. But it doesn't mean that you don't learn what they have done. It's important to learn what everybody has done, but then find the right solution for ourselves.
Yes, sir. I agree that it is very contextual, and we come back to this institute that because it's one of a kind, first of a kind, I would rather say, it is easier to specialize and research here and look at the context that transportation in India particularly needs, so that we can form unique solutions. So, sir, you have known the institute structure of the curriculum, and what do you think that in what fields do the graduates from NRTI could find their career in, or even graduates in transportation, and what skills and knowledge would they need?
Janvi, honestly, I do not know the full structure of the curriculum. I know only a few of the courses. I don't know the full structure of the curriculum, but at least the few courses that I know, what I like about them and the fact that there are courses of this nature that have been introduced tells me that transportation is not being taught as an engineering subject here. I think that is the one thing that I like about it. It's being taught much more as a public policy or a policy making kind of thing. I'm not saying that there should not be engineering courses. That's also important, because transport is to quite an extent also engineering, but it's not only engineering. So merely designs, merely a lot of mathematics, to me, transportation is much more than that. So I like the idea that at least some of these courses have been introduced. I think as a result of that, people passing out of NRTI will be much more rounded personalities, more appropriate from the transport field than from other institutes that I have encountered. So to that extent, I feel it will throw up the kind of professionals that India will need in the years to come in this sector. And transport, I think, is going to be a very important field in the years to come, not just to facilitate our economic growth, but also because of this massive emphasis on climate change, massive emphasis on air pollution, transport will be in the limelight, will be a very important component of whatever remedial measures are going to be taken on all of this. So you need a lot more transport professionals.
Thank you, sir. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for all the insights that you've given us.
Thank you. Thank you, Janvi. Pleasure talking to all of you. Pleasure.